Abandon hope, all ye who enter here.
He's quoting Dante.
Resident Evil.
Revelations is a weird one. It's an old school take on modern Resident Evil trying to emulate old school Resident Evil on handheld hardware, eventually making its way onto console hardware. The game primarily focuses on Jill as she investigates an abandoned cruise ship in the Mediterranean, which is incredibly similar to the original plot of Resident Evil Code Veronica, which had Jill on a STARS mission in Europe fighting Nazi zombies on a U-boat. First we have to talk about the developers. Revelations was published by Capcom, but it wasn't developed in-house. Toshi Software has a storied past with Capcom due to their hands-off approach. Quote, "Our policy is not to have a vision. Instead, we follow our customers' vision. Most of the time, we refuse to put our name on the games, not even our staff names. As such, Toshi has gained a reputation as being a ghost developer." Capcom have outsourced development to these guys before on larger titles like Zero and Code Veronica. They fully worked on Resident Evil Survivor for the PS1. Long story short, these guys are like the Winston Wolf of Japanese game developers. 1 year before Revelations, they put out Resident Evil Mercenaries 3D for the Nintendo 3DS. This used a simplified version of the RE5 engine and ran quite well on a handheld. The game was just a time attack mercenary mode, which became a bonus raid mode in Revelations. The director Koshi Nakanishi worked as a designer on RE5 and went on to direct Resident Evil 7, which makes a lot of sense given the return to horror, blobby enemies, and extended boat level. Mercenaries 3D was action heavy and designed for short bursts given the limitations of the handheld. Nakanishi went for a more compact horror atmosphere designed around the handheld and the 3D screen, so obviously I played the PC version. The game got a HD remaster and was brought to all modern consoles and up-res with some changes. First-person aiming and laser sights have been removed because you weren't looking at a DS screen, and a new enemy was added. Some, if not most, of the problems the game has is because of this transition, so let's just get into it. The game is set before the events of RE5 following Chris and Jill in the early days of the BSAA. The story is told in this primetime TV sort of way. They hired an anime writer named Dai Sato to make the story as shocking as possible.
Sorry, but I can't authorize that.
Edge of your seat viewing. The levels are broken up into episodes like RE4 and 5, each lasting 20 to 30 minutes. Problem is, each episode ends with a shocking twist or revelation, if you will, only for everything to get resolved at the start of the next scene. Then there's the...
Previously on Resident Evil Revelations.
It also recaps the previous episode at the start of every episode. This would be cool if it played when you booted up the game, sort of like The Witcher 3, but no, it plays after each episode and reminds you exactly what you just saw. This is, again, down to it originally being on a handheld. Chris has gone missing, so it's up to Jill and her new partner, Parker, to travel to his last known whereabouts. I like Parker, God knows he's better than other one-off Resident Evil companions, but I don't know why he looks like Bill from The Last of Us, or why we couldn't just get Barry. There's some quick tutorializing, and at the end you fight one of the Skag Dead. Revelations gets a lot of crap for not having a lot of enemy variety, which is true compared to the action trilogy, but as a return to form it has the same amount of enemies, if not more, than RE Remake. The developers really showed some restraint and didn't just give us a bunch of zombie sea creatures. The enemies are these gross bloated corpses that look like tumors, just plain awful to look at. Flashback to the beach and you're introduced to the big new mechanic in the game, the Genesis Scanner. You can scan new enemies. When the meter is full, you get an additional heal. You can also use the Genesis Scanner to find hidden ammo and weapon upgrades. You can also use it during combat to find hidden or invisible enemies. It's neat, but it has the same problem that Detective Vision has, which is I don't want to play the game looking like this. You can move while shooting, which is a first for survival horror RE. Your melee attack has a dedicated button. I do have a gripe with weapon swapping. It's mapped to the D-pad with left and right scrolling through firearms and up and down for throwables. This never felt right. Borderlands, for example, you have two weapons equipped, which you can swap by pressing triangle and access a third by holding triangle. That way you know what weapon you're gonna get. In a high-stress environment, it's tough to remember if left of your pistol was shotgun or machine gun. The 3DS version just had the weapons on the bottom screen, so you could just equip them instantly that way. The game has random difficulty spikes. It's either too easy or too hard. Enemies move fast because you can move and shoot, but when there's too many, it's hard to keep track. The camera feels a bit too close. It's similar to RE4 and 5, but those games had more open environments. Revelations has tight claustrophobic corridors with enemies quickly closing in on you, which is probably why they brought back their dodge from RE3. You push the thumbstick in the direction you want to dodge at the very last second. This took some getting used to, but makes the game so much easier. There's bosses and enemies that require you to be able to dodge, and it adds a little more depth to the gameplay. There are item boxes, but no inventory management. Instead, the player character can only carry 3 weapons at a time. These can be upgraded and modified by finding weapon parts, ranging from increased ammo capacity to totally changing how a weapon fires. You can swap these out at any point and change up the configuration. There's hidden modifiers. The game only shows you 3 stats for each gun, but then you have something upgrading the weapon's stun by 50%, and I'm like, what that? One thing I would have liked would be the ability to select my loadout at the start of an episode. It brings you to a menu anyway to tell you how you did. Sometimes the level won't even have an item box. Health is indicated by percentage jam on screen. Jill can take 2, maybe 3 hits before she needs a heal. You are limited to 5 green herbs. Your ammo capacity is also capped until you find an ammo pouch, so you can't just keep an infinite amount of ammo in the item box. The majority of the game takes place on the cruise ship, the Queen Zenobia. This is the 3rd RE game to be set on a ship, and I don't care, it's great. The ship has these massive dining rooms, fancy halls, and a frickin' casino. It's basically a giant mansion on the sea. The entire ship is explorable, even with the game's episodic structure. Areas are stitched together with elevators and loading screen doors, which is a limitation carried over by the 3DS. It doesn't really make much of a difference, other than it would be cool if it was seamless. It's a bit tough to navigate. You have the traditional top-down map on your HUD. This is just for the current area you're in. The menu map is this Clone Wars-ass 3D hologram. You can't really rotate it, you go through the rooms by the list. You do a lot of backtracking, and it's just unnecessarily difficult to figure out how to get to where you need to go. As for the puzzles in the game, they're pretty simple. The only real ones are these wire puzzles. You have to untangle the wires and place them on the nodes. Classic puzzles return, like finding crests and weird keys. These are streamlined, sort of like in Resident Evil 0. You'll walk past a locked door on your way to an objective, find a key, then unlock it on your way back. The game respects your time and doesn't have you needlessly backtracking for something of minor importance. I touched on the enemies and bosses earlier, but they're actually quite good. Some old ones return, but there's plenty new. You got your default zombie, a larger version of the default zombie, and a ranged zombie. These guys are the ones you're going to be fighting the most on the ship. The bigger ones take more ammo to down, and the ranged ones hang back, which is kinda annoying. There's these exploder enemies that you can use to chain reaction, take out multiple infected. They burst into a ball of flesh when they die, which can be scanned. You do have to be quick. I don't know if this is by design, but most enemy corpses vanish after death, meaning you lose out on extra heals. Some of the classics. Zombie dogs, I never liked these guys, and hunters. This time around, they've been upgraded and can turn invisible, giving you a reason to use the Genesis scanner during combat. Also, Keith and Quint are the best part of this game, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
I hate snow. Snow hates you.
There's these giant tumor blobs that fight you a couple of times. They're a bit bullet spongy, but easy enough to outmaneuver. Now we get to the aquatic enemies. The latter half of the game is predominantly set underwater. These aren't the worst underwater sections. Most of the time, you're just wading through waist-high water. Under the surface lurk these guys. You can run through and try to dodge them or quickly shoot them when they surface, or use a scanner to find them before they find you. They sort of remind me of the salamander from Code Veronica. Just late-game hurdles which keep the game from getting stale. Now for the bosses. Resident Evil games rarely have good bosses, especially the survival horror ones. RE5 broke the mold, and Revelation keeps it going. The first boss you fight is this giant skagdead, the comms officer. This is a bloater style boss fight. You're in an area with explosive barrels and you're just supposed to go ham. It's the first real combat challenge in the game, and it's just solid.
Saw you at the station. Had a heart palpitation.
Rachel is this game's version of Mr. X, a recurring patrol enemy. She was a squad member who got by the ooze. What's creepy with the human infected is that they still speak. Like the comms officer who's begging for help as he tries to chainsaw you in half.
Stop it.
Rachel is the same. She ducks in the vents and pops out at the worst time, even after you beat her. Then there's the giant mutated shellfish. It starts as a classic ammo dump boss fight. You're stuck in an elevator and you just need to shoot at it until it stops. Then the real boss fight. The shellfish runs at you, then gives you an opportunity to hit its weak spot. You can just run out of the way or dodge as it destroys the arena. Eventually, Chris and Jill meet up again for some Resident Evil survival fan service. There's a boss fight against a giant mutant whale infected with parasites, which turns into a non-rail shooter. The boss fight starts off with a competent helicopter pilot dropping exactly what you need. Then you go up onto the helo and rain down bullets until the thing stops moving. I will say it was quite long, which the final boss also takes quite a bit of time, but the difference being it's quite good. I've fought a lot of tyrants in my time, but this Abyss Tyrant boss fight is probably one of the best tyrant boss fights in the entire Resident Evil franchise. The build-up is you going through this derelict sunken ship with creepy opera music playing, a bunch of preserved corpses, then this dude just chilling on a throne. He explodes into a Resident Evil boss and the game tests you on everything you've learned so far. There's phases on top of phases. The first one is either cancel his attack or dodge under it. Then he begins teleporting, creating a fake double of himself. You can spot the real one by the purple smoke coming out of him. He mixes in a second move with a fake out attack. Here you have to act quick because he doesn't give you much time to react. In his final phase, he throws everything at you. A bunch of unstoppable attacks which you have to dodge. This is one of the random difficulty spikes and it took me way longer to do than it should. It was more FromSoft than frustrating when he whipped out another phase. The game really ends on a high note. Revelations is only around 6 to 7 hours. There's enough enemies and bosses to keep you entertained. Honestly, they make it look easy. I was waiting for some random giant spider or giant scorpion or another giant spider to turn up, but it never did. It sticks to its guns and never wastes your time. Revelations is...
Sheriff, what about the raid mode?
Oh yeah, the game has an additional mode called Raid Mode. It's a bunch of combat scenarios with a bunch of playable characters. The quicker you complete the level, the higher your score. You earn XP and currency which you can use to buy new items and upgrades. It feels like Mercenary Mode with a bit more depth. They remix the enemies as well. You see the numbers fall out of them, some are bigger with a larger health pool and some are smaller but faster. The core of this mode comes from Mercenary 3D and it's a little bit extra if you wanted it. Resident Evil Revelations is the little game that could. During the peak of Action RE, it dared to re-enter the survival horror while still being modern. It undertook the ambitious task of bringing a console experience to an underpowered handheld, and I think it succeeded. For all intents and purposes, every, if not all, the complaints I had was due to the transition from handheld to console. The game was designed around the 3DS and it's the reason it exists. The HD version has its problems, but it doesn't change the fact that this is one of the best games in the series.
In honor of thy name, we accept our wrongdoing and transmute our flesh in remembrance of our sins.
He just quoted Dante!